Hello, my name is Michael Tressler and I'm a Senior Customer Engineer with Microsoft. Welcome to Module 5 of our Teams Rooms Foundations training, Installing and Configuring. In this module, we'll go through the complete out-of-box experience, starting with Windows and through to configuring the Teams Rooms app. Once we complete that, we're going to go through testing to make sure that everything is working correctly in our newly configured Teams Rooms. The out-of-box experience, or UBI, happens when you first power on Teams Rooms. In order for out-of-box experience to complete, the first thing it must do is install Windows, and then it'll ask you a few questions about your Windows installation. First, it asks what region are you in. In this case, I'm in the United States, so I'll take that option and click yes. It then asks if the US keyboard is the right keyboard for me. It is, so I click yes. It'll ask a second time if you have a second keyboard, and I didn't, so I picked no. At this point, Windows will go for about another half hour and reboot 1 or 2 times. And when Windows completes its installation, you're brought to the Teams Rooms out-of-box experience. The first question is to read through and accept the end-user license agreement. So we click the box in the bottom and then click Next. It asks for our account. Now this is the resource account we created in the previous module. So we enter the email address of the resource account and the password. Now we could enable modern authentication by flipping the switch at the bottom of the options. In this example, we're not going to use modern authentication, so we'll leave that blank. The supported meeting mode has 3 options. Skype for Business only is the default. And there are 2 that include Skype for Business and Microsoft Teams. The first is Skype for Business Default and Microsoft Teams. The second is Skype for Business and Microsoft Teams Default. Ultimately, what the difference is here is that when you are on the console and you choose to create a new meeting, whichever one is set as default will dictate what kind of meeting is created. So if you have Skype for Business Default, and Microsoft Teams set, the first one in the list. Then when you create a new meeting on the console, it'll be a Skype for Business meeting. If you choose the second option, the one that's highlighted on this image, and you click New Meeting on the console, it'll be a Microsoft Teams meeting. In this example, I'm going to take that second option, with Microsoft Teams being the default option, and click Next. We then have some options for Skype for Business. I'm in a Teams-only environment, so I'm going to leave these blank. However, these values are necessary if you're in a complex Skype for Business environment with multiple domains. Check with the Skype for Business experts if you do need to fill out these values. So in this case, I'll leave it blank and click Next. Finally, we're finished and we're given a congratulations message. So at this point, we can click Finish, and we have completed the out-of-box experience for both Windows and Microsoft Teams Rooms. So you got your new Teams Rooms, it's all plugged in, everything's connected, you hit the power button, and you come to this. Eventually, Windows will start installing. Now it has an auto-unattend.xml file, so it basically skips all the questions that Windows would usually ask, like creating a hard drive and partitioning and that sort of thing. And it takes you to there. It asks you what region are you in. So in that case, I picked English. And then it asks if this is the right keyboard layout. US is my keyboard layout, so we'll go ahead and click yes. And then no second keyboard layout. And off we go. And that's really all you have to do for the Windows side of turning on and bringing up a Teams Rooms device. After this, it thinks about things for a little while, reboots once or twice, jostles around, and eventually it'll take you to the Microsoft Teams Rooms setup screen, which we see right here. Now that the Windows out-of-box experience is completed, we're then brought to the Teams Rooms setup screen. So I'm going to accept the license terms and click Next. And then I'm going to have to type in the username or the mailbox name really that we created earlier in one of the videos. And in that case, we created a Bonanza conference room. So I'll go with conference room Bonanza. And then I need to type in the password. Now I need to decide the meeting mode that we're going to use. If we're a Skype for Business only corporate company or operation, we would just take the default Skype for Business only. That's a great option. Move along. If you're considering or you're starting your migration to Teams, but you're pretty Skype heavy, you may want to go for that first one, Skype for Business Default and Microsoft Teams. I'm going to select the second one, Skype for Business and Microsoft Teams Default. What that really means is when you walk up to the console, you're going to see the Teams look and feel. And when you create a new meeting on the console, it'll create it as a Teams meeting. If you use Skype for Business only or Skype for Business Default, that all kind of gets flipped. That you see a little different interface when you walk up to the console. When you create a new meeting, it creates a Skype for Business meeting, but it still supports Teams meetings. So picking one of those with Skype for Business and Teams is really your most flexible option, and that's the one you should probably go with. I don't have modern authentication enabled on this tenant, so I'm going to leave this switch off. But if you have modern authentication requirements, go ahead and flip that switch and then click Next. From here, we have some Skype for Business specific stuff. I'm in a Teams only environment, so I'm going to leave this blank. Just know that if you don't know what these fields are for, you probably don't need to know. And if you're in a complex Skype for Business environment, you'll know what these configure domain options are and what you'll need. So now I'm going to click Next. And congratulations, I can click Finish, and I have completed the initial setup of Teams Rooms. After a moment, Teams Rooms will sign in as a resource account, and if everything is successful, you'll see the screen here. My resource account is configured with a telephone number, so it can make and receive telephone calls. That's why I see the dial pad. If your resource account is not configured for PSTN calling, you would only see the icons New Meeting, Present, and More. So now that our out-of-box experience is complete, is there anything we need to do after the initial out-of-box experience? And yes, there is. There are 4 key things. The first one is to change the admin password. By default, all Teams Rooms devices ship with the exact same admin password. So it is poor security to keep that default password set. So the first thing you should do is change the admin password to something only you know. The second option is optional, and that would be a time to join Active Directory or Azure Active Directory. Joining Active Directory or Azure Active Directory would allow you to import administrators into the local administrators of Teams Rooms. The third step is to update the Teams Rooms app itself. Make sure you're on the latest version of Teams Rooms app, as there are new features and fixes with each release. Finally, and this is important, update Windows after you have updated the Teams Rooms app. If you update Windows before you update Teams Rooms, you may end up in a scenario where your Teams Rooms is running a version of Windows which is unsupported by Teams Rooms. In order to avoid this, always update the Teams Rooms app before you update Windows. So how do we get to the admin interface on Teams Rooms? I'll walk you through. First, on the console, we'll click the More button. After we click the More button, we click the Settings option in the menu that pops up. These slides do not show, but there is one screen that does appear before we get to the Settings window, and that is a Windows sign-in screen. Since this is an initial configuration, we will use the default password that ships with every Teams Rooms device. After we enter that default password, we are then delivered to the Settings screen. Here, we'll click Windows Settings, and this will break us out of the Teams Rooms app to the familiar Windows 10 sign-in screen. Here we've used the GUI to open the Users section within Computer Manager in Windows. We can see there is an admin account. We can also see that the Administrator account, the second one on the list, is disabled. That follows general security guidance to disable the built-in administrator account on Windows 10. So it is this admin account whose password we want to change. Here are some PowerShell commands that may assist you in configuring the Windows admin account. To change the password, you can use the following scripts at the top. And then the second one is to remove or disable the admin account. You do not need to leave the admin account enabled or even installed. You can completely remove it. Just be sure before you do that you have another local administrator account. Otherwise, you may lock yourself out of Teams rooms. There's more PowerShell to join Active Directory and how to rename the computer. You can do all of this, of course, using the Windows 10 administrative tools. There's nothing special to Teams rooms and how it is set up. So if you're already familiar with using the admin tools within Windows 10, you'll be comfortable in changing the password, enabling and disabling the admin account, joining Active Directory or Azure Active Directory, or renaming a device. So to change the admin password, we're going to have to click on the More button, then go to Settings so that we can get to the admin interface in Windows. We'll punch in the administrator password here and then click on Windows Settings. Now I'm going to click on Administrator down here and go ahead and sign in again with that default password. Now the first way I'm going to show you how to do this is kind of the simple way. So I'm going to right click on the Start button and select Computer Management right here. And that will bring up the computer management for this workstation. And in here we see this local users and groups. So I'll expand that, go to users, and there's the admin account that is created for Teams rooms. This is the built-in administrator account, this one here. That's one that comes with Windows. It is one of those best practices that you should disable this because it is a known account, a known username. So it's something that people could try to attack. So in this case, a new account has been created called admin. So I'm just going to right click, set password, and then proceed. And then enter the new password. And I click OK, and my password has now been changed. So now this Teams room system is much more secure than it was because it doesn't have that default password. Now if you wanted to do this via PowerShell, we can do that too, which is a lot easier if you're deploying a lot of machines. You can have a script and make it a little easier than having to go through these manual steps. So I'm going to right click on the Start menu and pick Windows PowerShell Admin. And then it's going to prompt me to accept the admin changes or to sign in as an admin. And then I've got some PowerShell commands here. $password read host as secure string. That is a way for me to type in the password so no one can see it. Then we're going to get the user account for admin and store that in a variable, and then we'll set the password onto that user account. So let's run this first command here and see what happens. So I typed in the password, just a bunch of stars, so anybody looking over your shoulder can't see what that is. And that is now saved in $password. Now we can take the second command, which grabs that admin account, and then finally we can run this command to set the password. And that's how we can change the password on a local account using PowerShell. So you could script this and maybe make it a little easier than clicking around. Once you've changed the admin password, you may want to add Teams rooms to Active Directory or Azure Active Directory. To do that, once again, right-click on the Start menu and go to Settings. This will bring up the Settings task. Now, there's other ways to get there, but one of the easiest is just to type Work inside the Search menu, which brings up Access, Work, or School. And from there, click Connect to access Work or School. The key point here is to go down to the bottom. I usually run off and type in an email address, go through the process, and at the end, it's not the result I'm looking for. So instead, join to local Active Directory or to Azure Active Directory. I'm going to pick Azure Active Directory, and so now let's type in an account. So I will put in my Azure Active Directory account, and then my password. And I have multi-factor authentication enabled on this account, so I'll grab my phone and then approve the sign-in request. So then it asks me to verify, but I do not have admin rights on the workstation yet. So this is my account. It's not an administrator on the workstation because, again, it's an Azure Active Directory account that needs to be brought down to the local workstation. So this goes pretty quickly, and the machine has now been added to Azure Active Directory. So now that that's completed, I can sign out as the local admin, sign in with my Azure AD account. I'm now signed in with my Azure Active Directory account. So I can now go and either disable or delete the admin account. So if I go to Computer Management, this will bring up this. So I can go to Local Users and Group, Users. And for now, I'm just going to disable this account, which is Properties, Account is disabled, Apply. Okay, and you'll notice there's a little down arrow now, so that if you try to sign in as admin, it won't work. I'm going to re-enable it real quick because I'm going to show you how to do this via PowerShell as well. So account is enabled again, so the little arrow is gone here. So now let me bring up PowerShell as administrator. And it's going to ask me to approve the elevated rights to sign in as admin. All right, PowerShell's open, so I'm going to paste in my command, which is disable-local user -name and admin. So at that point, one quick command, account's been disabled, and we can look again at computer configuration and make sure that we see that little down arrow, which we will, right there. So that's two ways to disable the admin account. You could always delete the account just by clicking there and hitting delete, or by running remove-local user -name admin. I'm going to keep mine around because this is a lab, but in production you may very well want to delete that admin account entirely. Up to you. There's no right or wrong way to handle this. And so that's how you disable or delete the admin account. After you've completed the previous steps, make sure that you patch Windows. After, of course, you update the Teams Rooms app first. Every night at 2:30 a.m., Teams Rooms will reboot. There's a scheduled task that starts at 2 o'clock in the morning. And its job is to go out to Windows Update, pull down any applicable updates, apply them, and reboot the device. It will also look for updates to the Teams Rooms app at the same time. Also be sure that after you've updated Windows, you've updated firmware. Not just of the attached components, such as cameras, microphones, and speakers, but of the Windows 10 Compute module as well. The Microsoft Teams Rooms app installs blockers to prevent installation of a version of Windows that is unsupported. In some rare scenarios, it's possible that Windows will update before the Teams Rooms app, and Windows Auto Updates will bring Windows to a version that is unsupported. After signing into the admin interface, it's a good idea to pause updates so you don't end up in a scenario where an aggressive Windows update updates Windows to an unsupported version before the Teams Rooms app has an opportunity to put in blockers. Now that we've secured the admin account, we can look to update the Teams Rooms app to the most recent version. So to do that, we start the Microsoft Store while signed in as a local administrator. So here's the Microsoft Store. We'll give that a launch. And then we'll hit these three dots up here. And that gives us downloads and updates. So now the Microsoft Store will look through and see what is installed on this workstation, what needs to be updated. And it looks like we do have an update. Now we click on Get Updates to see if there are any updates for the Windows Store apps that are installed on this Teams Rooms. After a little bit of time, we can see that Microsoft Store has found updates, and we can also see that there's a pending update for our Microsoft Teams Room, which is also the former Skype Room system. So the Skype Room system is what we're looking for on this update, and we will soon have a new updated version of the app. The Teams Rooms app only works with certain versions of Windows, So we want to make sure we have the most recently updated app to make sure we get the most recent version of Windows and Windows updates that are supported by that app. So that's why we go ahead and collect the Skype Room System or Teams Room updates first. Now that the Teams Rooms app has been updated, we need to go and update Windows itself. We always do this after we update the Teams Rooms app to make sure that we aren't installing a version of Windows that is not supported. So we go to the Windows Update settings inside the settings menu, and look, it's already got a bunch of them for us to install. So all we have to do here is click download. It'll download them in the background, and if it requires a restart, it'll ask us to restart, and we're good to go. So that's the order of updating a Teams Room system. Always the app first, and then the Windows updates. Once we've updated the Teams Rooms app, updated Windows, changed the admin password, and updated firmware, we may want to review the settings of our Teams Rooms environment. To do this, we return to the console, we click the More button, and then click Settings. Settings will bring us to the About screen, which will show us our app version, our Windows version, and our IP addresses, as well as our host name. The Account and Skype for Business screens are the exact same we already saw during the initial out-of-box experience and setup for Teams Rooms, so we'll skip them and go down to the Meetings section. In Meetings, we have three options. One is automatic screen sharing. This means if someone takes their laptop and connects it via HDMI cable to the console, it will immediately be shared into the room. If you'd like to disable that feature, untick this option. Show meeting names. If there are upcoming meetings to be shown on the console, the name of the meeting will be shown by default, such as Weekly Status Meeting. If you're in a secure environment and don't want to have any leakage based off meeting names, such as Acquisition of Company X meeting, you may want to disable this feature. At this point, it would show only the name of the organizer of the meeting. The third option is leave meetings automatically if everyone else has left. What this means is if all of the remote participants have left the meeting, then the meeting room will automatically sign out of the meeting as well. This is a security feature and a resource savings feature so that the meeting doesn't stay active while no one is around. In the device option, we have a few options. So here we can enable or disable dual monitor mode. So if you have two monitors, you'll want to turn this feature on. Swap screens will flip what is shown by default on the left monitor and what is shown on the right monitor. One monitor will show a view of the attendees. Another monitor will show a view of the content that's being shared into the meeting. If you'd like to swap which side shows the attendees and which side shows the content, you can flip this button. The Bluetooth beaconing setting is used to enable proximity join. People can add Teams Rooms meetings simply by being close to the room and adding them from the join screen of their iOS, Android, or Windows 10 devices. Automatically accept proximity-based meeting invitations means the Teams Rooms will automatically join the meeting if they've been invited via proximity join. If you disable this, you'll have to hit a button on the console to manually join the meeting. Send logs with feedback. This will allow you to send logs from the device to your IT department or to your Teams Rooms administrators. When in a meeting, there'll be a feedback button on the console. Users can click that feedback button and submit their feedback. That will then be forwarded to the email address listed here. Here's an example of the email that is sent when somebody clicks feedback, fills out the form, and submits it. There's an attachment at the top with all of the logs for you to review, as well as a high-level overview of the issue, such as poor audio in this meeting. It'll also then let you know the OS version and a few other build versions and things to assist with support. In the peripheral section, you'll have the opportunity to change the microphone, speaker, default speaker, and, if applicable, the content camera. Many of the peripherals will have both microphones and speakers, but you may choose to use only a specific microphone from one device and a specific speaker from another one. In this area of the settings, you'll have that option to set which microphones and which speakers to use. Teams Rooms ships with some pre-selected themes. In this area, you'll have a chance to change the themes from the default setting to a new one. In this case, I've chosen Purple Paradise because it reminds me of the Teams color scheme. You do have the opportunity to upload a custom background, and we'll get into that in a later module. Now that we've configured our Teams Rooms by assigning a resource account, patching and updating, and setting our default settings for the device, it's time to test to see if the Teams Rooms is working correctly. So the first thing we'll do is we'll create an ad hoc meeting. To do that, we'll click New Meeting on the console. It brings up this screen, and this is a Teams meeting by default. If we're a Skype meeting, we'd have a different look and feel, more similar to Skype for Business or Skype for Business Online. But in this case, we're in a Teams meeting, so we'll type in the name or number of someone in our organization, in this case, Megan Bowen. The address book finds Megan, we tap on her, and she's added as an invitee. We can then click the invite button to invite her to a meeting. Here we see that Megan has joined the meeting. At this point, we would work with Megan to make sure our camera and audio are working correctly, that she can hear us and we can hear her, and that she can see us and we can see her. We may also choose to share things into the meeting, such as via the HDMI cable connected to the console. When we're finished, we click Hang Up and validate that the test worked correctly. If you note in the bottom left, there's a Report a Problem link. This is a link that would be clicked by users if they had an issue to report. If our resource account is configured with a telephone number, we can test dialing. At this point, we can click the dial pad button. It brings up a new screen with a dial pad, and we type in the phone number we're trying to reach and then hit the place a call icon. At this point, we're in the call, and we pretty much only have to test audio just to make sure we were able to reach the remote attendee. Once we've validated that the audio in the phone call works, we can hang up and move on to the next test. In the dial-in test, we dial the phone number of the resource account, which is seen in the upper right. Someone takes their mobile device, calls us, and we get a prompt on the console. We choose to answer with audio only, as video won't work on a PSTN call. So we click the middle option. At this point, we make sure that the call came in, and we validate that all the audio works just as in the dial out test. When we're done, we can hang up. Testing HDMI sharing. At this point, we grab a laptop, connect the HDMI cable, and if we have auto sharing enabled, the screen will change to this, where it simply shows stop presenting. We can look on the display monitors inside the room and make sure we see the same thing that is being shown on the laptop. When we're done with this test, we click Stop Presenting. Testing a scheduled meeting join. The first thing we need to do is schedule a meeting. So in this case, we're going to do it from the Teams client. Here we can see we have added the location of our new Teams rooms into the meeting invite. This is the resource account. This resource account will auto-accept the invite, and then the console will be updated showing that there is a meeting pending. Here's a view of the console showing that meeting. So at the appropriate time, we can click the Join button to test the meeting. So we click Join, Teams Rooms joins the meeting, and then again we can test quickly with Megan to make sure audio and video and any sharing works correctly. After we've completed those initial tests, there may be some additional things that we need to validate. We want to make sure that the room account name and phone number are shown correctly in the upper right of the console. We want to make sure the Windows computer name is set correctly. It's important to set computer names for remote administration so that you can easily determine which machines are where based off a friendly name and not the auto-generated name that is produced by the Windows install. We want to make sure that the administrator account is set up and verified. So we've made changes. Be sure you sign out of Windows and sign back in as that administrator, or as an Active Directory or Azure Active Directory administrator to make sure that you can access Teams Rooms successfully. And we want to make sure that all of our firmware updates have been applied, not only for the compute module, but for our camera, speakers, and microphones. We want to make sure that cameras are functional and positioned optimally. You'll want to make sure that the pan, tilt, and zoom features of a camera that has this capability, that they work correctly. People are often spooked if a camera is pointing at them, even if there's no meeting going on. So you may want to set a home location on certain cameras that points down or away from the table, so that people feel more comfortable in a meeting that does not have audio and video with remote participants. You'll also want to validate that audio and video is working appropriately, that they're loud, so walk around the room. When in your test meetings, be sure to walk around the room to make sure that you can be heard in all of the areas where attendees are expected to sit. Make sure the person you're testing with on the remote end can hear you as you walk around the room in the areas that are anticipated to be used by the in-room attendees. This will validate that speaker and microphone placements are correct. For the console, make sure cables are secure and not pinched. They should be secure so that people don't borrow a cable, specifically the HDMI ingest cable. You'll want to make sure that audio ingest over HDMI is functional, and you'll want to make sure that video ingest over HDMI is also functional. One note is that currently audio via HDMI will only be available in the room and not to remote attendees. If the dock can swivel or move around the desk, make sure it can do so freely without pinching any cables. And make sure the display brightness is acceptable for the environment. No one wants to sit in a very dark room with a super bright console. Conversely, it's difficult to read a console when you're in a very bright room and the brightness is turned down to low on the console. In summation, we went through the complete out-of-box experience, starting with Windows and moving on to Teams Rooms. We then did some post-out-of-box setup, such as changing the admin password, updating the Teams Rooms app, and updating Windows. We then validated that the settings inside Teams Rooms are correct. And then we did a bunch of testing to make sure that all of the tests worked correctly. So now you know how to set up a Teams Rooms device from out of the box into production.